I surprised my husband on Valentine's Day, but found him proposing to his boss instead. Prologue. The thing about surprises. My grandmother used to say that a surprise only works in your favor if you're the one holding it. She wasn't a cynical woman. She kept a small pressed violet tucked inside her Bible, a Valentine's Day flower her late husband gave her in 1962, and she'd take it out sometimes and just look at it for a while, not with sadness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows she was well loved. "Delia," she'd say, pressing my hand between her papery palms, "don't ever let a man make you feel lucky just to have him. That's backwards. You make sure you know your own worth before you hand it to someone else." I thought I did know my worth. I was 34 years old, a licensed CPA with my own small firm, 2 staff accountants working under me, and a reputation in our mid-sized Ohio city for being the most thorough, unflappable numbers person in the county. I'd built my practice from scratch, starting with freelance tax work at my kitchen table 5 years before, turning it into a real office with a real lease and real clients who referred other real clients. I'd done it quietly, without fanfare, while everyone around me assumed that my husband Garrett was the engine of our household, because he wore the nice suits and had the impressive-sounding title and went to the kind of dinners that required jackets. I was the background hum, the reliable infrastructure, the woman who handled the finances, kept the house steady, and smiled when he walked in late for the 3rd time that week with a bottle of wine and a story about client entertainment. I thought I was being a good partner. I thought I was being patient. That February 14th, at 6:47 in the evening, standing in the doorway of a private dining room at Celeste, the nicest restaurant in the city, a reservation I could never get because Garrett always said the waitlist was impossible, I found out exactly what kind of fool patience had made me. But the thing about a surprise is this. You can be standing there with your stomach on the floor, your heart blown open, the candles blurring through your tears, and it can still, eventually, work out in your favor. If you're the one who ends up holding it. Chapter 1. The Good Wife. I thought I was Garrett Marsh had been my husband for 6 years. We'd met at a mutual friend's housewarming party, and he'd made me laugh within the first 10 minutes. A real laugh, not a polite one. He was tall, easy with people in a way I always envied, and he told me on our 3rd date that he admired how focused I was, how I knew exactly what I was building. "Most people just drift," he said, and I thought he meant it as a compliment. I believe now he meant it as a category. He was filing me under useful and stable, which is a fine quality in furniture, and a terrible thing to be in a marriage. We bought a house on Finchley Drive when I was 29. My down payment, his name first on the mortgage, because his credit score was slightly better, and his mother suggested it would look better to the bank. I let that go. We'd been married a year by then. I was still in the phase where letting things go felt generous rather than erosive. His career was in corporate development. He sourced partnerships for a mid-sized logistics company called Vantage Group. Good salary, good bonus structure, the kind of job that rewarded charm and relationship building. He was good at it. His boss was a woman named Renata Holt, who'd been at Vantage for 12 years and had risen to VP of Business Development. Garrett mentioned her the way people mention important weather, frequently with a kind of reverence that I noticed but filed away under professional respect. Renata this, Renata thinks. Renata said we should. Renata has a way of seeing things. I met Renata exactly twice. Once at a Vantage holiday party 3 years into our marriage, where she shook my hand with the controlled warmth of someone who's excellent at controlled warmth, looked me in the eye for precisely the right amount of time, and moved on. And once at a summer company picnic, where she didn't remember my name and called me Garrett's wife twice, both times to my face. I should say something here. Renata Holt was beautiful, polished in that deliberate way that requires significant maintenance and money. She was 41, divorced, no children, and she had the particular confidence of a woman who had cleared every obstacle in her path through sheer targeted effort. I didn't dislike her for any of that. I disliked her later, for different reasons, in a way I think was entirely fair. Garrett started working late in October. November, the late nights got more frequent. In December, he missed my firm's holiday client dinner, the one I'd been planning for 6 weeks, the one where I introduced my 2 best clients and signed a contract renewal worth $60,000 annually, because he said Renata needed the whole BD team in for a last-minute pitch prep. I sat at the head of my table with 11 clients and smiled and shook hands and signed papers and took the Uber home alone to a dark house. I remember standing in the kitchen that night in my good dress, eating leftover pasta from the fridge because he hadn't started the dinner he'd promised to make, and thinking, something is wrong. Not the sharp, certain knowledge that comes later, just the low, animal awareness that something in the air had shifted. I thought it was stress. His bonus was tied up in a complicated deal. I told myself that. I kept telling myself that all through January, while he came home distracted and went to bed early, and stopped asking how my day had been. Chapter 2. The Reservation. I couldn't get the Valentine's Day plan started as a small act of reclamation. I'd noticed, in that quiet accountant's way of mine, that our marriage had become transactional. Not hostile, just flat. We moved through the house on parallel tracks, polite and organized, like two efficient strangers sharing a well-maintained apartment. I told myself this was a phase. I told myself that busy people went through phases. I decided to do something about it. I called Celeste the first week of February. The woman on the phone told me, apologetically, that they were fully booked for Valentine's Day, as they had been since early January. I asked if there was a cancellation list. She said yes, and took my number. I didn't really expect anything to come of it. But then a funny thing happened. On February 8th, a client of mine, a restaurateur named Dominic Ferrara, who ran 3 establishments in the city and whose books I'd managed for 4 years, called to thank me for catching a payroll error that saved him nearly $12,000 in a quarterly audit. He asked if there was anything he could do. I mentioned, almost as a joke, the Celeste reservation. Dominic laughed. "Celeste is my cousin's place," he said. "Give me an hour." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had a reservation for 2 at 7 p.m. on February 14th in one of their small private dining rooms. Dominic had even arranged a small chocolate cake with a personalized note for the table. I didn't tell Garrett. It was going to be a surprise. I spent the next few days quietly pleased with myself. I bought a new dress, dark green, fitted, the kind I usually told myself was too much effort, and made an appointment to get my hair done that afternoon. I arranged to leave work early. I planned to go home first, change, and then drive to Garrett's office on Commerce Street to collect him at 6:30, walk him over to the restaurant 2 blocks away, and let the evening unfold. I even thought about what I'd say. How I'd tell him I'd noticed the distance between us, and that I wanted to close it. How I wasn't the type to let things drift. How I loved him, and I was choosing to show up for our marriage, and I hoped he'd choose the same. I rehearsed it in my car the whole way to his office, which, in retrospect, was the saddest part of all. Chapter 3. What I found at his office. Garrett's office building had a glass lobby with a security desk I'd visited enough times that the evening guard, an older man named Philip, recognized me and buzzed me through without calling up. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, walked the familiar gray-carpeted corridor, and found the BD department largely empty. It was nearly 6:30 on Valentine's Day after all. Most people had somewhere to be. His desk was empty. His jacket was gone. The little cactus I'd given him as a desk-warming gift when he moved to this office 2 years ago sat on the corner, slightly more dead than the last time I'd seen it, which felt like editorial commentary. I texted him, "Hey, heading to your office to surprise you. Where are you?" No answer. I waited 5 minutes. A colleague of his, a young woman named Bethany, who I'd met at the Christmas party, came out of a side room with her coat over her arm, and startled slightly when she saw me. "Oh, Delia, you're looking for Garrett?" "I am." Something moved across her face. A flicker I couldn't read then. "He left about, maybe 20 minutes ago. I think he had dinner plans." She smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. Happy Valentine's Day. He had dinner plans. I sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. He'd told me he had to work late. He'd told me that morning. I could hear the words exactly, standing there in the gray-carpeted corridor. "Don't do anything for tonight, okay? I've got a pitch wrap-up dinner. Might be 9 or 10 before I'm home." I'd nodded and said okay and kept the reservation secret and thought I was being romantic. He had dinner plans. I'm a methodical person. I don't spiral. I took out my phone and opened the Find My app. We'd set it up years ago after his car got towed and he couldn't find the lot. The little dot that was Garrett's phone was 2 blocks away, stationary, at an address I recognized only because Dominic Ferrara had texted me the confirmation details 6 days earlier. He was at Celeste. Chapter 4. The private dining room. I walked those 2 blocks in my good green dress and my good heeled boots, and I want to tell you I was numb, but I wasn't. I was very, very present in my body, aware of my own breathing, the cold February air, the way the restaurant's gold-lit windows looked beautiful and terrible simultaneously. The maitre d' at the front, a young man in black, greeted me by name because Dominic had made sure they knew the reservation was mine. "Ms. Marsh, wonderful to see you. Your party is in the private room." He reached for a menu. "I'll find my way," I said. And I did. The private dining rooms at Celeste were down a short hallway, behind glass-paneled doors etched with frosted botanical designs. I could see through the frosting, not clearly, but shapes, light, the warm impression of candlelight and white tablecloths. I pushed the door open. I was very quiet when I did it. That was the thing. I didn't burst in. I turned the handle carefully and opened it slowly, the way you do when you're a little afraid of what's on the other side, which meant I had a full 3 seconds of watching before either of them knew I was there. Garrett was on one knee. He was in his best suit, the dark navy one I'd had dry cleaned for him last month. There was a small black box in his hand, open, and even from the doorway I could see the ring catching the candlelight. Renata Holt was seated across from him at the table, set for 2. One hand pressed to her mouth, and she was crying. The beautiful kind of crying. The kind people do when they're very happy. The table had my chocolate cake on it, the one Dominic had arranged for me. The little note card was still in its envelope. Garrett's back was to me. Renata saw me first. Her eyes found me over his shoulder and went very wide, and that was when he felt the change in the room, that particular human sensitivity to being watched, and began to turn. Delia. I have tried since then to identify what I felt in that moment. I think it was less like devastation and more like the specific, crystalline experience of a thing you half knew suddenly becoming fully true. Like when you're balancing an account and find the discrepancy that explains every anomaly for the past 6 months. The numbers had been there. I just refused to run them. "Don't get up," I said. He did anyway. Chapter 5. What I said and what I didn't. What I didn't do. Cry. Scream. Throw anything. I had one very cold moment where I thought about picking up the chocolate cake and doing something theatrical with it, but I'm not a theatrical person, and my grandmother didn't raise me to be. What I did do. I stood in that doorway for probably 15 seconds, which felt much longer, and I looked at both of them very steadily. Garrett had gone the color of old putty. He was holding the ring box, which struck me as almost comically awkward. He couldn't close it without acknowledging he was caught mid-proposal, and he couldn't put it down without it sitting there like evidence. He was holding it. Renata, to her credit, had composed herself quickly. Her happy tears were gone. She sat very straight and looked at me with something I might even call respect, if that isn't too strange a word. "How long?" I said. I wasn't asking both of them. I was asking Garrett. He said my name twice more before he managed an actual answer. "Delia, it's not, please don't tell me what this isn't," I said. My voice was even. I was proud of it. How long has this been happening?" A long pause. "About 8 months. 8 months. September, then. Before the late nights. Before Christmas. Before January's long flat silence. It had started before any of the things I'd told myself were stress, were workload, were phases. I nodded slowly. "Were you going to tell me?" Delia, I was going to talk to you after..." He stopped. After what? We both heard. After the proposal. He'd been going to propose to his girlfriend and then come home to tell his wife. I looked at Renata. She held my gaze. She didn't apologize, and I actually respected that. A performed apology in that room would have been worse. "The reservation is in my name," I said. "I booked this room. I was coming to surprise you." I paused. "I hope the cake is good." I turned around and walked back down the hallway. Chapter 6. The Night Itself. I drove home on autopilot. I sat in my driveway for a while, I'm not sure how long. And then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table in my green dress, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The 8 months, the late nights, the Christmas dinner I attended alone, the pasta from the fridge, the cactus on his desk. The practiced speech I'd rehearsed in the car about choosing each other, about closing the distance. The ring in his hand that wasn't for me, that maybe had never been going to be replaced and renewed the way I'd sometimes imagined when marriages hit rough patches. I cried. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't quiet, dignified crying. It was the full, ugly, kitchen table kind. Then I dried my face. I made tea. And I did what I do when I need to think clearly. I opened my laptop and looked at numbers. Our finances were, as I might have predicted, complex. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, and then my separate business accounts. The house mortgage was in both names. I had kept meticulous records of every payment I'd made. Down payment, monthly mortgage contributions, the kitchen renovation 2 years ago, that I'd paid for entirely myself when Garrett's bonus was delayed. The car we called his was also in both names. I had receipts for everything. I am an accountant. I have always had receipts for everything. I wasn't calculating revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was calculating reality, what was actually mine, what was owed, what the honest numbers looked like when I took the wishful thinking out. By midnight, I had a clear picture. And the picture was that, while Garrett Marsh had a good salary and a good title, I had quietly built more actual net worth than either of us had spoken about honestly. My firm was doing extremely well. My savings in my sole account were substantial. The largest asset we shared was the house, and on the house I had the receipts. I texted my friend and attorney Pauline Osei at 12:15 a.m. Sorry for the hour. I need a divorce lawyer by Monday. Her reply came back within 2 minutes. I've been expecting this text for 4 months. Call me at 8. I sat with that for a moment. Even Pauline had seen it. I'd been the last to know. Chapter 7. How he came home. Garrett came home at 2 in the morning. I was still at the kitchen table, but I'd changed into comfortable clothes and the teapot was empty. He came in slowly, with the energy of a man braced for an explosion. I think he'd been rehearsing his own speech in the car. I could see it in the way his first breath was a setup, a preparation. I didn't let him deliver it. You should sleep in the guest room, I said. I've already moved your pillow. We're not discussing anything tonight. Delia, I need you to understand. Not tonight. I kept my voice level. Tomorrow we can talk about logistics. Tonight I need you to go to the guest room. He stood in the kitchen for another moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully parse. Guilt, certainly, and something else. Maybe surprise at my composure. Maybe he'd expected the explosion too. Maybe he'd thought, somewhere under all of it, that I wasn't the type to hold the surprise. He went to the guest room. I sat in the kitchen until 3 a.m., and then I went to my grandmother's old Bible, which I kept on the bookshelf in my study, and I took out the pressed violet. She'd been gone for 7 years. I hadn't opened the Bible in a long time. The violet was still there, impossibly preserved. Its purple faded to a soft, brown violet, still pressed flat between the tissue paper she'd wrapped it in. I held it for a long time. Don't ever let a man make you feel lucky just to have him. I thought, I let him. I had let the dynamic tip so far toward his comfort, his career, his title, his needs, that I'd been planning a surprise romantic dinner to reclaim his attention, as though his attention were a favor being withheld from me, not something I deserved by simple right of the love I'd given. I had been grateful for crumbs at a table I'd built myself. Not anymore. Chapter 8. The logistics of leaving Pauline Osei had gone to law school after 10 years as a social worker, and her particular combination of professional skills made her both an excellent divorce attorney and someone who could hold your hand through the conversation without it feeling patronizing. She was also my oldest friend. We'd met in college, and when I sat across from her on that Saturday morning, she made us both coffee and let me tell the whole story without interrupting. Then she opened her notepad. The house, she said. Joint mortgage. My down payment, $82,000, wire transfer, documented. I have all of the records. Renovation? 41,000, my account, last 2 years of receipts. She was writing, "You want the house or the equity?" I thought about it. I didn't want the house, not the house on Finchley Drive, which had started to feel like a stage set for a life that hadn't been real. I wanted the equity. Equity plus my down payment back. We'll push for the full down payment as a separate line item. It's clean documentation. She tapped her pen. His car's in both names? It is, but I don't need the car. I want it removed from my name within 60 days of filing. Pauline nodded, writing, "What about his claims on your business?" This was the part I'd been thinking about most carefully. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. My business had been technically started before our marriage. I'd opened the LLC 16 months before our wedding, but it had grown significantly during the marriage. Garrett could theoretically claim a portion of that growth. "I have documentation," I said, "showing that every investment in the business, every operational expense, every client development cost came from my premarital savings account and my business account, never from joint funds." He never contributed a dollar to it. Did he ever provide any services to the business? Informal consulting, contacts? I considered this honestly. He introduced me to one client in year 2. That client left 18 months ago. We can work with that. Pauline put down her pen. Delia, he was cheating. He had a ring. This is a fault state. Infidelity is relevant. It won't change asset division dramatically, but it establishes character for the judge and it affects any alimony considerations. "I don't want alimony," I said immediately. "I don't want a cent of his money. I just want what's mine." She looked at me steadily. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She respected that. She filed the paperwork the following Wednesday. Chapter 9, Renata Holt's Complication. What I didn't fully anticipate, what nobody could have really, was the way Garrett's situation at Vantage Group complicated itself within 3 weeks of my filing. I found out from Bethany, who apparently felt some version of guilt for that corridor exchange, and had started sending me brief, carefully worded texts. On the last day of February, she texted, "Thought you should know. There's a policy issue at Vantage, HR investigation. Renata is on admin leave." I sat with that text for about an hour before I called Pauline, who told me it wasn't my business, and I shouldn't involve myself. She was right. But the information trickled out anyway, the way these things do in mid-sized cities, where everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. Vantage Group had a strict policy against relationships between direct supervisors and their reports. Renata was Garrett's direct superior. 8 months of concealed relationship, the proposal in a restaurant, Bethany's "I think he had dinner plans," all of it had apparently reached HR through channels I was not a part of and did not orchestrate. Garrett had been placed on administrative leave as well. An investigation was underway. I want to be honest. I did not report them to HR. I want this on the record of my own conscience. I filed for divorce. I did not file a complaint. The discovery came from inside the office, from people who had known longer than I had, and had their own reasons. The consequence of all that, however, was real. Garrett's bonus, the one he'd been counting on, the one that was going to fund the ring, and presumably some transitional living arrangement, was frozen pending the investigation. He hired a lawyer on his credit card. His lawyer called Pauline within a week and mentioned, somewhat desperately, that Garrett would like to settle quickly and equitably. Pauline called me after. "He wants to be cooperative," she said, and I could hear the careful neutrality she was using to hide her satisfaction. "Good," I said. "Let's make sure cooperative means fair." Chapter 10. The day he signed. The mediation took place on a Tuesday in late March, in a conference room downtown with beige walls, and a long oak table that had seen, I imagined, a great deal of human sorrow. Garrett came in with his lawyer, a man named Clifford, who looked tired. Garrett himself looked diminished. Not physically, he was still tall, and he'd kept his suits nice, but something in his bearing had caved inward. He didn't look at me directly until we were both seated. Pauline sat beside me with her organized, tab-divided binder, and she was beautiful in the way that prepared people are always beautiful. The terms we'd proposed were fair. I want that on record, too. I didn't go for blood. I asked for my documented down payment returned, my proportionate equity in the house upon sale, his name removed from my business records, He'd been listed as an emergency contact on one old form, which Pauline flagged as a technicality, but wanted clean. The car transferred out of my name, and a clean division of the joint accounts. I asked for nothing from his pension, nothing from his salary, nothing that could be characterized as a reach. Garrett's lawyer tried once to push back on the down payment as a line item. Pauline placed my bank records, wire transfer documentation, and a post-closing statement on the table with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has been waiting a long time to put something on a table. Clifford looked at the documents for 2 minutes and then had a brief, murmured conversation with Garrett, who was reading the wire transfer document with an expression I can only describe as the face of a man who forgot he was married to an accountant. They stopped pushing back. At 3:17 p.m., Garrett signed every page. He looked at me once, across the table, when it was done. He opened his mouth and I genuinely don't know what he was going to say. I'm sorry, maybe. Or I didn't mean it to happen this way, which is the thing people say when they mean I meant all of it, but I didn't mean to get caught. I held up one finger, just barely, and shook my head. Not because I was being cruel, because there was nothing he could say in that room that I needed to hear. I had what I needed. It was documented. It was signed. We left in separate elevators. Chapter 11. What my mother said. I should have mentioned my family earlier, because the divorce didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in the context of a family who had spent 6 years telling me how lucky I was to have Garrett. My mother, Verna, called me the day after I filed. Bethany, it turned out, was not the only one with a tendency to notify people. Garrett, bless his self-serving heart, had called my mother first, before he'd called his own. He'd told her his version. They'd grown apart. They wanted different things. He was sorry. My mother called me and said, "Delia, what happened? Garrett says you're filing." I told her what I'd found, calmly, with dates. There was a long silence. Then, "Well, men have needs, Delia. If you'd been more—" "Mom," I stopped her, not angrily, just firmly. "Don't. I'm just saying, maybe if you'd worked a little less." He proposed to her, in the private dining room I booked, for a surprise Valentine's dinner, for him. Another silence. "Oh," she said in a smaller voice. I didn't comfort her. I didn't manage her feelings about this the way I had spent 34 years managing everyone's feelings about my choices, my career, my hours. I said, "I have to go, Mom. I'll talk to you when I'm ready." And I got off the phone. She called back 2 days later. This time she said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said." It was a small apology, and it was real. My mother is not a bad woman. She is a woman who was taught that a husband is a woman's primary achievement, and she'd been teaching me the same thing without knowing it. We had work to do, she and I, but she was trying. My sister Camille, who had always had a sharper sense of humor and a lower opinion of Garrett than she'd ever voiced to my face, texted me, "Finally. I'll bring wine on Friday." She brought 2 bottles. We sat on my living room floor until midnight, and I told her everything, and she was furious and funny in equal measure, and exactly what I needed. Chapter 12. Building the... After I moved out of Finchley Drive in April, into a 2-bedroom apartment in the Riverfront district that I'd found on a lunch break and decided on within 20 minutes. It was on the 4th floor with wide windows and good light, and the kitchen was small but had a gas stove, and I could see a slice of the river from my bedroom window on clear days. It cost a little more than I wanted to spend, and I signed the lease anyway, because I had spent 6 years making small practical concessions to someone else's comfort, and I was done. I put almost no furniture in it at first. Just the things I'd taken from Finchley Drive that were genuinely mine. My desk, my grandmother's Bible and the books she'd given me, my kitchen things, my bed. The living room had a rug and 2 chairs and a lot of empty space, and for the first month, I didn't fill it. I wanted to know what my own space felt like without someone else's taste in it. It felt, unexpectedly, like breathing. At work, I threw myself back into the practice with the energy of someone who had been diverting considerable emotional resources elsewhere, and suddenly had them all back. I took on 2 new clients I'd been too cautious to pursue. I hired a 3rd staff accountant, a young woman named Priya, who was brilliant and methodical, and reminded me of myself at 26. I started working toward a specialization in forensic accounting. the analysis of financial records to detect fraud or misrepresentation, which felt, under the circumstances, like a professionally appropriate direction. I didn't date. I didn't want to. I wanted to be alone in my good light apartment with my gas stove and my books and my work, and know who I was without the static of someone else's needs obscuring the signal. Garrett and Renata, I heard through the grapevine, Bethany again, who I'd somehow kept in sporadic contact with, had broken up within 2 months of the investigation. The HR findings had resulted in Renata's resignation and Garrett's reassignment to a different division, which was quietly understood by everyone at Vantage to be a sideways demotion. He was still there. I wasn't interested in his suffering, but I also wasn't going to pretend I felt nothing about the fact that the great romance he'd blown up our marriage for had lasted less than 90 days after the ring. The ring, incidentally. Bethany texted me once, "Did you know he'd had that ring for 3 months before Valentine's Day?" 3 months. While he was coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, accepting the meals I cooked, and the house I kept, and the financial stability I provided, he'd had a ring in his desk drawer for another woman. I put the phone down and went for a long walk along the river, and I thought about my grandmother's violet and what she'd meant by knowing your own worth before you hand it to someone else. I hadn't done that. Not fully. I'd handed a great deal of my worth to a man who'd spent it carelessly, and I'd called it love. And it hadn't been love, not from his side, not in any real sense of the word. The walk helped. The river was gray-green and cold, and it didn't care about any of it, which was oddly comforting. 1 year later, by the following February, I had moved a few things into the apartment. A proper couch, finally, a deep velvet one in a dark teal that I'd wanted for years, and Garrett had said was impractical. A small dining table with 4 chairs that I mostly used to spread client files on. A print on the wall by a local artist that was mostly color, blues and golds and a slash of burnt orange, that made me happy every morning when I came into the living room. Priya had turned out to be so competent that I'd given her a raise after 6 months and was considering making her a junior partner within the year. The forensic accounting specialization was opening new doors. I'd been brought in as a consulting expert on a business dispute that went to court, and the attorney who retained me said she'd be calling again. The firm was the healthiest it had ever been. My mother and I had dinner once a month. We were learning to talk to each other differently. It was slow work and imperfect, but it was honest in a way our dinners hadn't been before, and I valued that. On February 14th, 1 year exactly from the night at Celeste, I was home by myself, which was entirely by choice. Camille had invited me to a group dinner. A friend from college had suggested a wine bar she'd heard was good. I'd thanked both of them and kept the evening for myself. I made pasta from scratch, the real kind, because I'd been teaching myself over the past year, and I was getting genuinely good at it. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, a deep Italian red. Nothing special. Special enough. I put music on. I sat at my 4-chair table, alone, and I ate a proper meal and didn't think about Garrett Marsh. I thought about the year. What I'd lost, which was real and had hurt, and still carried a ghost ache on certain days. And what I'd found in the space after, not just legally, not just financially, but the deeper thing. The self I'd been muffling with domestic patience and strategic smallness, the version of me that knew her own worth and wasn't going to hand it over again without being very sure it was going somewhere safe. After dinner, I went to my study, the second bedroom, all mine, my desk by the window with the river light, and I opened my grandmother's Bible to the place where the violet had always been. I'd moved it when I moved out of Finchley Drive, and it lived here now, on this shelf, in this apartment that was entirely mine. I took it out and held it for a moment. Don't ever let a man make you feel lucky just to have him. You make sure you know your own worth before you hand it to someone else. I knew my worth. I was learning it more precisely every month. The way you understand a business better the longer you run it, not all at once, but in accumulating certainty, in the evidence of your own sustained work. I put the violet back carefully between its tissue paper and closed the Bible. Then I sat for a while at my desk in my good light apartment, the river just barely visible through the window, the wine finished, the evening entirely mine. A surprise only works in your favor if you're the one holding it. I was holding it. End.